So good evening, everyone, and welcome here to the Exploratorium on this beautiful evening in the observatory here. We're pretty lucky. My name is Martha Eamon Conti, and I'm proud to serve as the Vice Chair of the Exploratorium Board of Trustees. On behalf of the board, it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening. Each year we gather for the Directors' Dinner to thank the leadership donors, all of you, for your generosity and commitment to our mission. Your support funds everything that we do here, from hands-on exhibits that spark curiosity across generations, to field trips that expand access to joyful inquiry-based learning, to our innovative teacher professional development programs that deepen classroom impact. You are not only sustaining the Exploratorium, you are shaping its future. I would also like to thank the trustees that have joined us here tonight, if you wouldn't mind standing so you can be acknowledged. And we're also thrilled to welcome a number of alumni trustees back here tonight. So if you wouldn't mind standing so you could be acknowledged. We have a fascinating discussion planned for you with an inspiring panel of thinkers and researchers in AI, neuroscience, and education. The conversation will be moderated by cultural anthropologist and a trustee, Roberta Katz. Thank you again for being here and for being such enthusiastic and essential partners in the work that we do. We are honored to share this evening with you. Enjoy the conversation and enjoy your dinner. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Bierman, the Sakurako and William Fisher Executive Director here at the Exploratorium. Thank you. It's really wonderful to have you all here tonight. I want to call, in case you haven't turned your heads around, to look at the bay lights on the bridge tonight. I think they are officially installed next week. And the artist Leo Villarreal was here at the Exploratorium a couple of weeks ago. I had the great pleasure of visiting with him, and they installed a camera on our roof so that they can mess around with the lights remotely from their studio in New York. Pretty cool. Thank you all for being here for tonight and for your generous support of the work we do. This is one of my favorite evenings of the year, and the subject of tonight's discussion really could not be more urgent. There has been a lot of catastrophizing about AI across the nation and the world. And I get it. But catastrophizing is not the same as understanding. And understanding is what we do. We do know through research, actually, that social media and now AI are quietly eroding curiosity, discernment, and a willingness to engage and to question. The Exploratorium exists to nurture these qualities. And we're beginning to explore how AI can enhance them rather than diminish them. And that's why your support matters so much right now. So our origin story has really never felt more alive than at this moment. The Exploratorium was born in 1969 out of tremendous upheaval into a society questioning its institutions, its authorities, and its assumptions about what was true and who gets to decide. Our founder, Frank Oppenheimer, worked alongside his brother Robert to build the atomic bomb. The story is well known. It was developed in secrecy by a small elite, but its consequences were felt by everyone. The public's access to information and understanding was limited, and both real and perceived harms loomed large. Does that sound familiar? So I've often said that the Exploratorium was Frank's karmic reparation for creating a force that could end the world. After Los Alamos, Frank lived for years in exile with the consequences of science deployed in secret at scale by men who believed they knew best. He eventually found his way back into teaching and channeled all of his genius into building what the moment demanded, this vast public science lab where people of all ages come to lose themselves in the everyday miracles and mysteries of the physical world. It was an extraordinary act of political faith that revolutionized how science is taught to ordinary people everywhere. And once again, the crises of our current moment demand something from us. The Exploratorium's countercultural ethos reflects its roots in a city that keeps disrupting the world for better and for worse. The tools developed just blocks from here, especially in AI, are reshaping how people learn, decide, trust information, and it's happening faster than the development of norms and ethics or regulations can keep pace. The unease that people feel is real, so is the confusion, and so is the sense that decisions are being made by a small elite while the rest of us have to live with the consequences. So the questions the Exploratorium's founders were asking: how do we give people the tools to understand and to participate in these decisions? These are not historical artifacts. They're today's questions. The Exploratorium was built precisely for moments like this one. We are facing a crisis of learning in the age of AI. The easy story is that human intelligence is being threatened by machine intelligence. But the real story is actually more insidious. Despite having a world of information in our pockets, we've become less discerning, less curious, less awestruck, and more polarized, more credulous, and more isolated. So the Exploratorium does something radical at a time like this. It puts you in front of a phenomenon that you don't understand, invites you to mess around with it, and refuses to explain it to you. You're given some questions to consider, but there's no signage that is going to tell you what to think or give you any answers. And there's no algorithm that serves you content that you already agree with. You have to look, you have to touch, try, fail, figure it out for yourself. That could be our tagline. And you're usually doing that alongside strangers who are as puzzled and as intrigued as you are, whether they're kids or a PhD scientist. And in a world that is quietly outsourcing thinking for you, I think that's a revolutionary act. So here's what that looks like in practice. Last summer, we opened an exhibition on artificial intelligence, adventures in AI. And that was the result of 3 years of research and development by our exhibit design and engineering teams. And Doug, you were one of the lead exhibit developers. Doug Thistlewood, everybody. Stand up, Doug. All right, yes. So many of these exhibits are now permanently installed in the new Technology and Humanities section in the Bernard and Barbara Osher Gallery 1. And that is just the beginning. We have formalized that commitment in a new innovation agenda that will guide our research and development going forward. So our agenda focuses on 3 initiatives, including the future of intelligence, which explores what it means to be intelligent in an age of machine intelligence, and how we help the public engage with the ethical, social, and ecological consequences of these technologies in their own lives. And tonight's conversation is exactly that work in action. The museum is only part of the story. We also work through schools and with our partners around the world. Dr. Megan Taylor is one of our panelists tonight, and she directs the Exploratorium teaching and learning programs that support science educators. And I'm not going to ask her to stand up because you're going to see her right here in a minute. So the rapid proliferation of AI tools is demanding a fundamental redefinition of the purpose and challenge of school-based teaching and learning. No pressure. And Dr. Taylor is working on a project to reimagine and future-proof the K-12 classroom, not just as a tech-enhanced container for content delivery, but as a space where human connection and curiosity flourish. So I think we all look forward to hearing more from Dr. Taylor tonight. We also have a special guest tonight, James Alistair Sprang. James, where are you? James needs to stand. James? All right. James is the Exploratorium's newest artist in residence, and for the first time in the program's 50-year history, we held an open call this year, and James was selected from more than 500 applicants. James joins an esteemed group that includes Ruth Asawa and Brian Eno and many others. Artists like scientists, yes, thank you. Artists like scientists help us notice and understand the world. And James, we're so glad you're here. And this is today is literally his first day of his 2-year residency. So all of you, everyone in this room, you understand something that's easy to forget right now. And it is that understanding is a human act. It requires curiosity, patience, and a willingness to be wrong. Those qualities cannot be automated, at least not yet. They can only be nurtured. And that's what we do every single day because of your support. So thank you. Thank you. So now I am honored to cede the podium to Dr. Roberta Katz of the Center for the Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford, who will be introducing our panelists and moderating tonight. Roberta is the co-author of the book Gen Z Explained, about the effects of growing up fully immersed in digital media. And she also happens to be an Exploratorium trustee and former board chair. So, Roberta.
Okay, welcome. I'm not going to introduce each of these amazing people because you have in the program that was handed out to you the bios. So I don't want to use up your time with that because they are going to have some interesting things to say, and I want to get right to it. So first thing, we're going to do a speed round. And the speed round is going to be, I want to ask each of you, how do you define intelligence? What is intelligence as you think about it? So, Lan, let's start with you.
Well, that's a very complex question. I think as
It's a speed round.
yeah. Well, I define intelligence. I think intelligence has to have context. What are you trying to get smart at? The way you learn, you get better in the correct context. I'm a brain scientist. I study frontal lobe function, which AI does not have any. But if you're doing math or IQ, which is the highest. So I think it's a very complex question, and I can spend an hour explaining it.
Megan?
I have to admit that I cheated and I asked AI what it thinks my definition of intelligence is, knowing anything it knows about me, and it listed a bunch of things. And I read that list and I said, well, that's kind of sucky. And but in reading that list, I realized that I think my definition of intelligence has everything to do with an ability to build and sustain and evolve relationships. And I think the people that I can think of that are thriving in all the ways human beings thrive do that really well.
Oh, Surya.
That's great. I think intelligence is the ability to rapidly solve a problem that's very, very different from anything you've ever experienced. The pinnacle of intelligence, for example, was Einstein, where he figured out that, by thinking about people falling in elevators in outer space, he realized that gravity was the curvature of space and time, right? That's so far outside of the realm of human experience, but he figured it out, right? And AI can't do that yet, so, yeah.
Okay, so you each gave a slightly different answer. We're going to be talking about the future of intelligence here. Does it matter that we all have the same definition of intelligence? Surya, let me go in opposite order here.
Yeah, I absolutely don't think so. I think intelligence is a multifaceted quantity. I mean, you were talking about social intelligence, was incredibly important. There's various different types of intelligence, but I think the key is like rapid learning and optimizing behavior, whether it's in a social context, whether it's a scientific context, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different definitions and types of intelligence. So I don't care so much about having a common one as kind of an acceptance that it's going to be dynamic and should be. And when I think about, comparing machine intelligence or human intelligence, I think that's the key thing for me, is understanding that both are evolving and should and are going to continue to indefinitely, as they always have.
I think it matters a little bit in the context of artificial intelligence, and people talk about AGI, when that's going to come and take my job. And for me, I think that matters in terms of managing people's emotions about like, when are we going to achieve that so we don't have work or anything. So, I think it's probably helpful to have some kind of unified way of interpreting as what are we talking about. If we're talking about solving mathematics or chess, okay, IQ, AI is pretty good. If we're talking about crystal intelligence, pretty good. But social intelligence, just not there, right? It can mimic how to be a good listener, but it doesn't understand what you're talking about, like, socially. So a frontal lobe, it doesn't exist. So I think it's probably helpful to have some kind of industry agreed upon what are we driving towards. So when companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, all these companies building their models, when we make investment, we know what stage we're at. And I can give you that definition. When we make investment, if we're looking at whether computer today can do what average human can do on specific tasks. So I think it's specific enough, but there are also companies now are trying to make computer more like human. I think that's about many years away. And we're talking about physical intelligence in the physical world outside of our computer. I personally think that's 5-10 years away, even further.
Thank you. I mean, we're going to dig deeper into this question of human intelligence and machine intelligence. But before we do, I want each of them to talk to you a little bit about what they do. So let me start with Surya. And I will summarize. He studies babies' brains and computer brains, AI brains, and learns from both. But that is very simplistic. Maybe you give us some examples of what you do, Surya.
Yeah, I mean, so I was trained as a physicist. I did actually work on string theory. Then I saw the light and said I want to do intelligence, and so then, I actually think about intelligence as there should be like a unified theory of intelligence that applies to both brains and machines. And you think of brains and machines as different solutions to the problem of delivering intelligent behavior. And we'd like to understand, how they do what they do, right? So with babies, we look at how they learn concepts, and can we create neural networks that learn concepts the same way babies do? And it turns out very simple neural networks can do that. On the AI side, there's these things called scaling laws. As you make these networks bigger and bigger, they do better and better. Or if you give them more and more data, they do better and better. But what determines the rate of getting better, say, as a function of the amount of data? OpenAI 6 years ago came up with this famous scaling law paper. How many of you have heard of scaling laws? Just curious. Okay, it's SF, so it's a significant fraction. But, these scaling laws motivated huge societal investments in data collection and compute and energy consumption. But remarkably, we have no theory for why AI gets better as you add more data. And we recently, just last week, we just put it on the archive, the first theory of how it does that. And it's actually based on the statistical structure of natural language itself. It's picking up on surface regularities in the statistical structure of natural language. And if we measure those regularities, we can predict the scaling laws. But they're way worse than humans, right? So AI needs to read about 10 trillion words to get as good as it does. We only get exposure to 100 million words. That's many orders of magnitude more than AI gets. If we read as much as AI read, it would take us 240,000 years. So that's how intelligent we are compared to AI. Remember, rapid learning is a hallmark of intelligence. These AI systems are not learning rapidly. They need 240,000 years of human experience to get to where they are. But they've, of course, read more than us, so they can do more than us in that respect. So they're very different things, but I think it's really fun to think about both together.
That's so interesting. Wow. Okay, I'm going to go to Lan next. Lan, I'm going to give the quick summary, has a PhD in cognitive psychology, basically, and she is now a venture capitalist. So how does your background as a psychologist influence what you're doing as a venture capitalist?
I started really actually understanding baby brains and computer brains. I actually taught language acquisition for computers, infinitely fascinating. And then went to the dark side, become a venture capitalist. Once I figure out that's going to take a long time to do. I mean, my passion for understanding human computer has never stopped. And when I started Basis Adventures, which is the name of my firm, we're one of the only firms to actually focus on AI. This is 2017. And now it become very obvious, it kind of like crossed the chasm a little bit. Everyone started investing in AI. So it really helps me to be the first believer when nobody was looking at this. And it really helps when we make investments, we invest in super early technologists, or invest in research. We back a lot of research scientists starting out to, with newer technology and starting new companies. It helps us to form the conviction from the first principle point of view, like what is actually science? What are we backing? Is this commercializable or not? So there are many elements that's super helpful for my career as VC. But most importantly, I think it really empowers me to empower other people who are better than me in so many different dimensions, and make sure they get the funding that they have and they can do what they need. And many people that are better than me, and I'm just very happy seeing that every day. We'll have a company announcement tomorrow. Just really happy to see someone else built this and with my support, and I'm not able to do that myself.
Lan, can I ask, how is cognition different from what we've been talking about with intelligence?
I think cognition is a vessel, it's a tool set. We're talking about human cognition. We're talking about frontal lobe, which is structurally we have it, right? We're able to have attention control, working memory, cognitive flexibility, many of these functions like human cognition. AI intelligence is dependent on this vessel, but AI doesn't have attention control working memory today. It's actually missing a lot of the components of the human cognition. It doesn't, memory, the system start to have more memory today, but if you're using Claude Code, tomorrow you talk ChatGPT, it doesn't know what you're talking about, right? And even if you're talking about something today, 2 days later, it doesn't know what you're talking about. So a lot of the basic human cognition, AI just doesn't have today. So we're building towards that. I think it's going to get better and better. And that's all the effort towards a more intelligent future for everyone.
Interesting. Okay, Megan, so how's the Exploratorium changing what it does in the realm of education and learning, both in the museum for the visitors and in our award-winning teacher training?
Well, I was just noting that on the screen and on your programs, it says the future of intelligence is why we're here tonight. And I think of that as a sentence starter that I would finish with: the future of intelligence is in our schools. And I think right now we've talked in California and in America for a long time about achievement gaps and opportunity gaps. And I think there's a relevance gap right now that's probably a bigger crisis, where schools and classrooms were built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And we have to just accept that. And I think we've talked as educators for a really long time about how to make schools and classrooms more, pick your word, pick relevant, interesting, exciting, joyful, whatever it is. But there's a particular crisis of this moment where redefining the purpose of schools is really more important than ever. We need a better reason. We need a reason why we should still bring human beings into schools, because we don't actually have a good one right now. And I definitely believe we should be bringing human beings into schools, for sure. But the things that we're doing with them there need to change. And when I'm asked why the Exploratorium in particular works with teachers and schools, which, by the way, we have since we opened our doors, it was part of Frank Oppenheimer's commitment and vision understanding that teachers are still the highest lever change for student achievement and all sorts of other factors in schools. I say we do an incredible job of bringing people onto our floor and getting them really, really excited about science, and more importantly, about their learning and their agency as learners. And we give them rightful presence in science, and we give them rightful presence as learners. and we send them out back onto the street. Sorry for throwing my pencil at you, Surya. I'm excited here. We throw them back out onto the streets filled with this enthusiasm. But when they return to schools, we are sending them to schools where we are under supporting and under resourcing their teachers, and where we are creating learning experiences that do not reflect the kinds of things they really need to be learning. So when I really think about how we are going to address innovation of the future, what's going to happen with intelligence, we have all the talent we need. They are in our schools right now. They are the human beings in our schools.
Megan, are there people actually talking about this? I worry, even in higher ed, that we are not we're not on top of the challenge that is coming in education.
Yeah. I am committing to you right now that the Exploratorium is going to play a role in the next 10 years in transforming classrooms in California. We're going to do that. It's going to happen. And I think the Exploratorium is going to play a leading role in that, and that's certain. But we also have an existing coalition of people in the state who understand that this is a critical moment. There's a quote that I really have been thinking about a lot lately. It was written by Hugh Vasquez from the National Equity Project. He wrote it in 2020, right during school closures in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And it was an article about disrupting the status quo. What if we just didn't go back to schools as they used to be? And he lists all these suggestions. And when you look at that list, we have gone back to every single one of those. But we are in another moment of great disruption, right? We are disrupted. So what's the opportunity there? I think that's why the conversation right now feels different. And I'll just add one more thing since you set me up for this. On Tuesday, my colleague Masha Rika here tonight and others are hosting an event where we are bringing researchers from all over the Bay Area and folks from organizations and other science museums and teachers together to say, what will it look like to do this transformation of schools in California?
I am so glad to hear that. And I don't know who's doing this for higher ed. So maybe you can help them too. Surya, I want to ask you a question about a little bit more about, Lan talked about cognition and the human experience. Has your research provided any findings about what makes each human unique? And how important is it that we humans develop our intelligence through an embodied experience where the brains are constantly interacting with the world?
Yeah, I think the embodied aspect of it is incredibly important. There's some talk about whether or not AI is conscious. I don't think it's conscious at all. I think you need embodiment for consciousness. And here's one of the leading theories of consciousness that we're actually testing in neuroscience experiments. So why does anything need to be conscious or even have a sense of self, right? Every one of you has a sense of self, that you are an entity in the world affects you, you affect the world. And that sense of self, that agency allows you to accomplish things in the world. Where does that come from? Why should if something made out of molecules suddenly develop a sense of self? Well, here's the theory. Every organism, by the way, I think dogs have a sense of self too. Like I think all sorts of animals have a sense of self. All of these mammals, they have a very complex, including us, have a very complex sensory array of what's going on in the outside world. Our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste, everything. We also have an equally complex array of sensors inside our body. How's our gut doing? How's our skin doing? How's everything else doing? So we have an organism that has a complex map of the interior, a complex map of the exterior. And what's the most important thing that organism needs to do? It needs to figure out how the exterior world impacts the interior world, right? If I'm hungry and I eat, I'll feel better. If I see a lion over there and I don't run, I might get eaten. So you get these causal models of how actions you do affect the world and how the world affects your internal state. And that's the ability to model yourself is, I think, where your sense of self comes from. So some experiments that we're doing in collaboration with neuroscientists at Stanford is giving drugs to animals like ketamine, which creates out-of-body experiences. And we're looking at neural activity patterns in the brain that tell the mouse where it is. And we see those activity patterns drifting, right? And they're drifting because you get this pathological oscillations in the circuit that creates your internal sense of self of where you are. So we're starting to see the neural correlates of these out-of-body experiences. And actually, like, it turns out that like these video models that people generate, they work really well in video when you have actions to take part in it, because the actions, like I move the joystick right, the world moves right. The AI learns the correlation between how you act and how the video changes, and you get much better AI from that. So this notion of embodiment, I think, is absolutely crucial. That's why language models, I don't think, will ever be conscious. They just don't have bodies. And if they are conscious, they're not conscious in any way that we are, because our consciousness depends on being in a body, I think.
Oh, I want to hear more about this. Let me ask some more questions here. Okay, this is for all three of you to, whoever raises the microphone first gets to talk first. Okay, so staying on this topic of learning and intelligence, some people worry that AI and robotics will make us humans more sort of observers of experience, and our AI agents will be acting on our behalf. And if we humans are less hands-on, less embodied discoverers of phenomena, our learning will be superficial rather than deep. What do you think?
Can I add a point from what you're talking about? I think it's just super fascinating. From my point of view, when we are looking at embodied robotics companies, this is one of the hottest areas today. Hundreds of companies getting funded, lots of money, trying to be your robot butler, right? What you're describing, the human experience is so complicated. A robot just cannot do. Like, where today, give you an example, the complexity of, like, if I have a robot hand picking up this microphone, it's very different from picking up a piece of paper, because robot doesn't know this is heavy and that is light. And it doesn't have pressure sensor, it doesn't have like the thing we simply take granted for. That alone is gonna take years for us to make a hand that's able to sense heat and weight and pressure, and then collect the data and then train robots to do the simplest thing that all our children are able to do today. So that's why there's such a gap between what humans can do and what AI can do today, because embodied robotics is just so hard. Sorry, and your question is, agents, okay, can we be observers versus?
Well, if we are kind of standing by the wayside, is it going to change us in a way that is negative?
I think it will change us profoundly. I don't know if it's going to be negative. I'll give an example. When we're talking about this, earlier. I grew up in middle school. I learned C++. Profoundly difficult, extremely boring for me, and this is why I'm not a programmer. But I learned it. It's you have to. My kid today really loved video games, wanted to do it. And I told them, you're allowed to only have an hour screen time if you play other people's games. However, if you make your own games, your program, you're allowed to have unlimited time. So my goal is to encourage them to learn to program the way I did. It's painful, but you got to go through the pain. So my 10-year-old older son, who loves Exploratorium, by the way, this is one of my favorite places, in 5 minutes, found the AI tool on the internet and cloned Minecraft immediately. So, and I'm thinking, you don't know how to program. You probably never learn how to program, but you're certainly very high agency. I didn't know how to do that when I was younger. I didn't know how to search for these tools and chat with the tool and build a game, but you know how to do that. So the takeaway from this is just yesterday for me is they're learning different skills. They're learning how to be, resourceful, high agency, how to manipulate different agents to satisfy what they want. But they may never learn how to go through difficult coding moments like fixing bugs and these things are just we have to go through. Learning different things. I don't necessarily think it's negative. It's just different.
Megan, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking a little bit about your, when you say we're worried that, the learning will be superficial rather than deep. We're there in schools. And so if that's what I'm going to speak to tonight, which of course I will, that's happening. And so I think we need to think about human beings in schools should be doing very human-y things. And we need to just accept that superficial learning is happening and decide not to accept it.
Surya, I don't know if you want to talk. I've got a follow-up question to that, but I want to give you okay.
Yeah, go for it.
There's some people who think that as machines become more intelligent, we humans will be able to turn all of our left brain thinking over to the machine, and then we'll spend our time expanding our right brain consciousness. And I'm well aware that that's a very simplistic way of describing. But recognizing that the left brain, right brain distinction is simplistic, will having intelligent machines do some of our thinking work dramatically change what we humans spend our time on, and will that in turn affect the evolution of our species? I mean, some of what you described, Surya, was also, not what IQ is the way Lan described it. Maybe we need to explore more of that aspect of being humans. And when you talk, Megan, about humans in the classroom being human, what are we talking about?
Yeah. Well, so I admit to you that in preparing for this panel, a lot of my family and neighbors, we have an urban family dinner every week. And so I brought some of these questions to the table, literally last week. And there were 9 to 60-year-olds at that table. So it was a very interesting conversation. But one of the things that came up is that we were acknowledging that there's always been these technologies that have, leapt humans forward in their ability to create a bunch of time or space to do other things. And then we've always filled that space with things that, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't fill it with. And we got curious about that. And one of the things that we came together around collectively was that when there is space let up or time let up for humans to do something with, and there is purpose connected to that space, really, really powerful, innovative, beautiful things happen. So I definitely think that space and purpose need to be connected in schools. And I definitely think that in general, human beings with more space and time freed up to do whatever they're going to do because AI is doing things for us. How are we ensuring that human beings get to figure out their purpose and lead purposeful lives with that extra space?
Surya, Lan?
I would say I would go a little bit old school. Like, we do have amazing technology, like we have calculators, right? But when we teach our kids arithmetic for the first time in their lives, say, I don't know, first grade, we don't hand them a calculator immediately and say, now start doing addition with the calculator. We teach them the logic of addition, what it means, subtraction, all that kind of stuff. We're going to have to do that at every stage. I as an educator in college, if I had my way, and I think I'm aligned with what people would want at Stanford, for example, we would, for fundamental topics like math, English essay writing, and so forth, I would do closed book, paper and pencil exams, no internet, no phone, nothing. And make sure they really can do it. Homework doesn't mean anything anymore because they can do ChatGPT all the time and just turn in whatever they want with that. So I would, homework is an exercise to make sure they learn what they need to do a closed book exam in the classroom. That would be my take.
Lan, you want to weigh in?
I mean, I embrace technology, and I think it will change us profoundly, and definitely will impact, evolution. But it's gonna take a long time, right? I think it will bring a lot of benefits, but the thing I worry about the most is AI makes everything so easy that we forget how to, what is how to go through the type 2 fun, which is paying, and to learn from that. I think the most profound moments in my life, it's failure, pain, right? Difficult moments. When everything becomes so easy, how do you learn from that? How do you learn from struggle? So I think that's what I worry about the most. Obviously, AI can take care of a lot of things we don't want to do, and we can, focus on the things that we enjoy. But I just worry for my kids. I don't know they understand what is the struggle. Everything's so easy. And I don't know how to manufacture that for the kids. So, I mean, that's my worry. And I think, I don't know what the solution is.
Closed book exams.
They probably just won't go to Stanford.
Well, let me give you each a follow-up to that, which is, what are you telling your children or other young people in your lives? How should they prepare for this future?
I tell my children the most important thing is critical thinking. I don't know they quite understand what that means, but everything I do, I train them to be a critical thinker. They know how to criticize ChatGPT. They talk to Gemini for hours. They know, it hallucinates. Everything I do, I bring them to work. They watch me criticize companies or, embrace companies. They criticize my team. They ask me who's the worst performer, who's the best performer. I mean, I bring them to work, which is good exposure for them. So critical thinking is just the most important thing I think my kids need to learn when everything else is becomes so easy. They need to be able to tell and have deep thinking actually becomes harder and easier. If you want to think, you can think. You have all the time to think. But if you don't want to think, then you don't have to think, which is bad, right? It becomes really bifurcated for the kids.
When you say critical thinking, what do you mean by that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've never thought so deep about so many concepts. My brain is just critical thinking. VC doesn't help you with critical thinking. It's so easy. Actually, I did a per novo scan. Everything about me ages backwards except my brain. It's older than I am today. That's the problem. Critical thinking is not, It's a great question. Critical thinking is, I think, the single most thing that college education is missing. There's a lot of you set up a goal, you do good on exam, and you're a good student. The same thing my entire life, that's kind of you're measured on. How do you tell good from the bad? How do you tell that with integrity? How do you ask questions 3 times, really dig into the fundamental reason why something were to happen? And how do you acknowledge you're wrong? And how do you have the self-awareness that you're wrong and correct yourself and learn from, things that are good, right? Those things are all really hard. So researchers, I love hanging out with researchers because they always, here's a hypothesis, we're going to collect data. I'm going to come back and correct, identify whether I'm wrong or right. I'm going to change my hypotheses. This loop doesn't exist for a lot of people. Especially with this algorithm online, you're just feed whatever you already know and just get down that road and never come back. So that's critical thing. You got to be able to have a out-body experience and really criticize yourself. Am I right? If not, where do I collect the data? How do I change myself? How do I get better? And that's what you were talking about, right? That's the most important thing.
Okay. Surya, do you want to go next?
What was the question?
What do you tell your
What do I tell my kids? Yeah. Again, I'm actually old school. My daughter's 4, so that she's kind of out of the picture. But my 10-year-old, I actually don't use that much AI with him, and I always ask him the why questions, why is something true? Whether it's in math, whether it's in coding. We code together in Python. I just want him to learn, and he likes it. It's fun, and we don't actually use the AI. It's what I think is you got to go through the struggle first and then get good at it. And then you can use the AI tools, just like you get good at arithmetic through your brain and then you use a calculator. My son's way better than I am at arithmetic. He can add 3-digit numbers in his head. And then he asked me to check it and I have to put it in a calculator, So I think there's enough time for him to learn AI when he gets older. But I actually, kind of like how Steve Jobs never let his kids have iPads or anything, I don't let my kids have AI. It's weird. I don't know. But I work on it.
All right. So Megan, you said a little bit about as an educator. Now, as a mom, what are you doing?
Yeah, I have 2 teenagers in my household, and I think that we agree we all maybe need to practice being human together in this time. I think we're out of practice being human together. So I think that's pretty simple stuff. I think it's touching trees. I think it's looking at the person giving you coffee and saying, how are you? And waiting for the answer, as Mashrika's son does with her. So I think that the more we can practice being human together, then we're going to be able to balance the way that these emerging technologies live in our lives with a little more grace and confidence, I think.
Yeah, actually, just to add to that, long in-person play dates, that's huge. I mean, both my son and my daughter have lots of that. And I think it's really important for real FaceTime with other kids. I think that's really important.
I agree. I'll tell you the favorite thing that my kids' school do, parents here, is every morning, rain or shy, the head of school stand outside of the door, shake hands with every boy come. It's an all-boys school. It teaches respect, teaches discipline, consistency, look into her eye. She knows who has a good day, who has energy, who has like, you got to learn all those. It's probably like 2 seconds, but that moment is like, I really like that. Right. So that's my favorite. Like, I don't go to school, but that's my favorite moment of the school for him.
I think you all are saying some very profound things here, actually. And I think societally, we all need more practice in this what you're describing as just essential human behavior. One thing that none of you mentioned, but I want to just throw out there, is the role of creativity and how where is the sort of the meeting of human intelligence and machine intelligence when it comes to creativity? And that's the last question I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to throw it open to you all. This one I didn't prepare them for.
Actually, we have a mathematical theory of how AI is creative, believe it or not. These diffusion models that generate images. I don't know if you know, the first diffusion model was actually, it was invented in my lab. So we were wondering, like, how does a diffusion model create a new image that's not in its training data, right? We came up with a very simple theory that works. To explain it in English, it creates a patch mosaic. So when it's creating a new image, it takes a little patch of one training set image, puts it down here, another patch of another training set image, puts it down here, and creates a mosaic of the training data. That's something called compositional generalization. We take elements that we know of and combine them in new ways. I suspect a lot of human creativity is like that, compositional generalization. But then there's something even more magical, which computer scientists call out-of-domain generalization. That's like coming up with something so new and so different that it's hard to imagine how it came out of the parts of human knowledge that existed before. Classic example is like Einstein's, the curvature of space-time as being gravity, or also Einstein's quantum mechanics and the photoelectric effect. Like, a lot of the ideas come from physics, but also in art and so forth. So compositional generalization, combining stuff we know, and then out-of-domain generalization, that's the more mysterious one. AI is still bad at out-of-domain generalization.
I haven't thought it's actually similar. So we're in the outlier business. We don't care about the average, call the outlier. That's all we care about. But if you use any of these models, you're definitely going to get the average, because that's what the models are trained on, right? You're definitively are not getting outliers. So by definition, AI is not an outlier model. It's not actually as creative as something like human can do. It's not cross-domain. It just doesn't know what it doesn't know. So by definition, human is more creative because you can come up with more things. But sorry, you were saying.
I was a math teacher, and I think about in math education, we talk a lot about, mindset and how it's common at a party like this for someone to say, oh, I'm just not a math person. But we often say in the math education field, no one would come to a party like this and say, oh, I just don't know how to read. And that wouldn't, for some reason, be okay to say. And I think there's something about creativity that's in there for me, is that it actually probably isn't that common to hear also, I'm not that creative. But I think human beings are creative beings. And so how are we cultivating that, making space for that in whatever we do?
Wonderful. Okay, I am opening it up now. Okay.
Thank you for your talk. It was fascinating, all of you. I'm an improv teacher and I actually have a class called... Oh, thank you for the microphone. My course is called Being Human Together, so I just kind of like ding. I have theories about whether or not AI will ever do improv, and by improv I don't just mean comedy, but I mean like human collaboration, creating a story from nothing. AI is very yes and. It's trained to agree with us basically and encourage us to use it more, I think, to help train it. Basically, that's my suspicion. But do you guys ever see a world in which, and I could say this writ large about the arts, painting or sculpture, but improv specifically, improv theater, meaning groups of people creating stories together, is AI ever going to be able to do that? And if so, what am I going to teach?
Can I go first? And it'll be a placeholder answer to give them a chance for their answer. Those teenagers that I was mentioning that were at the dinner last week, I actually had a chance just to sit with them for a little while before the grown-ups came and interfered. And we were talking about their definitions of intelligence. And one of the things that came up was improvs and creativity and emotions. And they had all of these wonderful things. And I asked them, Well, how long do you think it's going to be before an artificial intelligence entity can do all those things as well as you all can? And the two answers they came up with were 70 years and 300 years. And then they debated between those two. I find that fascinating.
So I have a related funny story. I was co-teaching a class on AI and entrepreneurship at Stanford with a very close friend of mine, Hemant Taneja. He's a VC at General Catalyst. And the students asked us, this was 5 years ago, okay? So the students asked us, what jobs will take the longest to replace with AI? And without even batting an eyelid, my friend said VC, and I said professor. And then the students just laughed at us. And then we looked at each other, we laughed at each other. Everyone thinks that they have the secret sauce, that they're not going to, including your teenagers. I have completely revised, like I was an AI skeptic, like I didn't think that next token prediction would get us these huge language models. I was blown away. And actually every single expert in AI could not have predicted 5 years ago that we have what we have now. If we went back 5 years in the past and showed them we have this technology, they'd say it's totally fake, you're totally BSing me. Every single expert, myself included, right? So I have no model for predicting what AI cannot be able to do in the future. I could say like 5 years for that. I could say 10 years for that. Who knows? Yeah.
Okay, but is he going to have any kind of a job?
It's a question. I mean, for all of us, if there's one thing I'm most worried about with AI, it is the future of work and what it looks like. And, there have been economic studies on that where AI-exposed industries and young people in those industries are having a harder time getting jobs. The jobs are going down in there. So I think junior people are coming into a very different world. I think the senior people will be fine and so forth for a while. But things are going to change. And, the nature of the economy is what can humans do to provide value to other humans in the context of the technology that we have right now? And that question is the question of our age. How do humans provide value to other humans?
Well, let me just say, Megan, that's what you were talking about. There's now space, and how do we humans? What purpose do we have to fill that space?
Yeah, which is the work.
Yeah.
I definitely think AI can be trained to teach improv, and I know there are models trained to have divergent thinking, like brainstorming, being creative. Is happening right now. I definitely think it can. However, I think two things AI will never be able to do. One, the vibe would just be different. Like teaching improv with AI models is very different with learning from a real person. Like the vibe check doesn't exist in these models. I think that will forever be kind of more of a human experience. The other thing is, I think everyone who is probably average at their job or like above, like will be like every job. I think AI will do better. However, the best will never be replaced. I think, the best VC, all the VC will be replaced by AI. Like, if you randomly invest in a company, probably outperforms average VC's investment. I'm pretty sure of that today, right? Except for you. However, the best ones will never, like, you can never train the intuition as good as a top performing VC. It's just really hard because our brains are trained over like decades and with so many different sensors. Experienced AI just don't have that data. So like, I think the best will be fine.
Cool.
I was thinking about all of this, and one of the things that sort of makes me think
that we're going to be in trouble in the future, not because of the development of AI so much, but it's sort of human dependency, is that I can reflect on my own experiences. I used to be able to do math in my head. And then I got a Casio calculator watch, and I thought, why should I spend the time doing that when I can calculate it exactly? And also, people say that, what you're given, if it makes it easier on you, then you're going to be doing something else. So when I think about a garage door opener, does that help your athletic prowess? It doesn't. The TV remote, you used to get up and have to turn the channels. I'm old. So I think that there's a lot of sort of human nature which gravitates toward dependency. And I think that like going to AI or ChatGPT or whatever it is, I think that in schools, and I would especially direct that to schools, is that if there's a teaching, if the orientation is toward how to use these things as tools, I think that there's a risk of being dependent on them. Rather than using your brain as an exercise, just like your muscles, is that the more you get away from that, the less functional it becomes. And the other thing that occurred to me is that there are people like the panelists who are very intellectual and very astute in thinking about the future and education and that sort of thing. But I just wonder about the average population. And I think that especially in education, in primary schools especially, is that there's more of a tendency for memorization and less dependency on creativity. You need the tools, obviously, when to grow up. So you need to have rudimentary mathematics and reading, those skills. But I think that I'm fearful that the education departments are not really focused on so much this, the intellect or it's just sort of memorization. And if you score well because you have a very good memory, then you think, well, this person's very smart. But a lot of times people that have very good memories, they might be ill-equipped for the world. And I think, it really has to be the early education that teaches children to think and to cogitate, not just memorize.
So Megan, you want to make a comment there?
Yeah, I appreciate everything you just said. I mean, I think power and privilege plays a big role in schools, right? And one of the things that's happening right now that I'm really interested in is that when I think about the definition, going back to the definition of intelligence, that has a bad reputation in education because the way we define intelligence in schools is very narrow, and it's a part of what schools were designed to do originally, right? Sort people into very specific groups, and mostly to sort out people. And I think that's what our schools are still doing mostly. And so when I think about what's happening right now, the people who maybe were called intelligent in schools through many of our generations because they were very good memorizers, or they were very good at taking tests, or they were very good at these school things, these doing school things, as Denise Pope would say, they're not as successful anymore either. And I think that's why, for me, things are changing a little bit, because I think we've got everybody worried. All the same students that we haven't been serving are still not being served. But the students that used to do school well aren't. And I think that feels really interesting and scary. And it's an opportunity.
All right, one last question from the audience. Okay, over here.
Thanks. Maybe this is for Megan, but maybe you can help me go home tonight without a worry. Drilling down, we just heard that the freshman class in University of San Diego can't pass junior high school math. Is this something we should let go of? And, this is the old privilege thinking and they'll make it up in social dynamics? Because there are other cultures who believe in driving those basics. So give me some advice. Should I just go home tonight and not worry about it? And or what is it really at the concrete level when they can't do junior high school math?
Yeah, well, so Gary actually asked me before I came up here, is this going to be hopeful or dire? And I promised him it would be hopeful. So we're going to get back on track. I would actually really be interested in what my colleagues have to say to that too, because I think that's a question for all of us. But I think we need to let a lot go. And I say that as a former math teacher. And I think that the things that we need to use school for have to change. They have to change in very real, big ways. And one way I think about that is there's an old TED Talk by Conrad Wolfram, mathematician, who's done a lot of really interesting things. And in this TED Talk that you can look up, it's a great TED Talk, even though it's very old, he makes this case that we spend 90% of time in schools teaching kids how to do mathematics by hand. And there are 3 other steps in kind of solving big problems. There's like figuring out what the big problem is, there's translating it into a math problem, there's doing the math, and then there's translating it back. And he says we spend 90% on that computing problem by hand, and we spend hardly any time on the other 3. That's still true too. So even if we said schools are going to still be about learning mathematics and learning all these things that we learn in schools right now, we're just going to think about how to learn those things in a different way. It opens up a lot of opportunity for how kids work together, how kids struggle through problems and make sense of things. And it certainly produces more innovative, confident kids who are going to ultimately lead the way in terms of all the things we're worried about. So I feel very hopeful about the next generation because I think we're in a moment right now where things have to change. We're getting pushed over the cliff. And I think there's a lot of good people who care about what happens.
Surya, I saw you shaking your head.
Oh, yeah, I don't think we should give up on the UC San Diego freshmen. I think it's a 5-alarm fire that they don't know junior high school math. And we need to understand why. I don't understand why because I actually sit down a lot with my son doing math. And again, I always do the why things. Like just, last night we're discussing areas of trapezoids and, the formula is base times height, but why? And we drew pictures about cutting one triangle off, putting the other side becomes a rectangle. And he's like, oh, that's why. And he got such joy out of it, How do we scale that? Like, how do you scale, I don't know, having a physics professor father to every student in the US? You can with AI, but we have to figure out how to do it. We can't let them be ChatGPT zombies that just get answers from ChatGPT. We have to figure out systems of user interfaces where AI challenges kids to really understand the why questions and sparks that joy in them. And I think we can do that, but it's going to take some time to figure out how to get AI to interface with kids. And it's not just going to be a duct tape thing. It's going to require serious cognitive research, education research, but I think it can be done.
So, Surya, you just gave a great advertisement for the Exploratorium. That is what we do.
By the way, I'm a big fan of the Exploratorium. My kids come here all the time, so it's great.
think we have the secret sauce. We just need to scale it.
Exactly.
Okay, with that, we're going to let you go have your dessert. These guys, I'm sure I'm speaking for all of them, will be happy to be up here answering your questions if you want to come up.